The goal is to recognize Princeton High School alumni that have distinguished themselves by their contribution in their field of study to the Princeton High School community and to society as a whole. By honoring these positive role models, we hope to provide inspiration to you, our current students, on understanding the value of education and citizenship and the possibilities to which it may lead. This year, the committee has selected Dr. Ryan Beebe to the Academic and Career Hall of Fame. Dr. Beebe graduated from Princeton High School in 2001. After high school, he received his Bachelor of Science degree with honors in biology from Calvin College. Dr. Beebe also graduated with a PhD from the University of Michigan in ecology and evolutionary biology with a focus in invertebrate paleontology. He is currently an associate professor of biology at Calvin University. Throughout his career, Dr. Beebe has been awarded numerous academic honors, presented in conferences, and had several publications, held numerous leadership roles in professional organizations, and been very active in his community. Dr. Beebe currently resides in Grand Rapids, Michigan, with his wife Melissa and sons Kyler and Devin. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Ryan Beebe.
Well, thank you very much. It has been quite a while since I've been in this auditorium for sure. And I have to say that this is an incredibly humbling honor for me to receive. A few people have asked me what it's like to be chosen for something like this, and I have to admit that it feels pretty surreal. If I'm honest, in many ways I don't feel like I'm deserving of something like this, but when I think about the journey that I've been on in my life, and I think about all the people who have mentored and supported me over the years, it just makes me really proud to be able to stand up here and to represent all of them. So I want to begin by just saying thank you to Princeton High School, to Mr. Herring, Mr. Belinsky, and the selection committee for the Academic and Career Hall of Fame. I'd love to thank a lot of teachers that I've had. I don't really have the time to list all of them, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention the late Bob Reeder and the late Elaine McVitie. Both of those individuals made very profound impacts on me when I was here as a student. They encouraged me to think deeply. They never shied away from me asking them hard questions. And they also taught me to pursue learning for its own sake, rather than simply for getting a good grade. So I have to thank them, but I also think I really need to make sure I thank my family here as well. So I'll first begin by thanking my parents, Bill and Cheryl Beebe, who are sitting down here in front. I think they're the ones that nominated me for this. And they constantly gave my four siblings and I just an immense amount of love and support. And they worked incredibly hard to provide us with everything that we needed. So not only a roof over our heads and food on the table, which I must tell you was a huge task in and of itself when I was a teenager, but also things like musical instruments, new basketball shoes, track spikes, but also then the ability to leave behind in-state grant money to go to college in Michigan, because that's where I felt like I was supposed to be. I also want to thank my family, my immediate family as well, my wife Melissa, my two boys Kyler and Devin. Kyler's down here in the front row as well. The type of work that I do takes a lot of long hours and can require me being away from home sometimes. It's often mentally and emotionally draining as well, as I pour myself into the students that I'm working with. And so none of what I do would be possible without their love and support as well. So to be honest, I'm much more proud to be up here representing all of those people and people that I didn't name as well than I am to represent anything I've actually done on my own. But with that being said, I'd like to take the 20-25 minutes that I have with you to tell you a little bit about my own journey, how a kid from Princeton who was only interested in sports and superheroes growing up actually became a paleontologist of all things. I've never seen that coming. And a professor who's working to help the next generation of both scientists and healthcare professionals to develop into all that they can be as well. So where did all that begin? Right here. Well, not in this room, but in Princeton. I was born at Willis Parent Memorial Hospital on Park Avenue. I grew up about a half-mile straight west of where we're actually sitting right now. I went to Jefferson Elementary School until 4th grade. Then I did Washington Middle School and Logan Junior High for 5th through 8th. And then I spent 4 years here at PHS. When I was young, as I mentioned, I grew up just fascinated with Batman and Superman. Marvel wasn't quite as big in the 80s, right? DC was where it was at. I did sports when I was a kid. I played Little League Baseball all through childhood, but I was not very good at hitting. So that kind of ended at some point in middle school. 6th grade was when I fell in love playing basketball. 7th grade I did track for the first time, and I found that I didn't love it as much as basketball, but I was decent at running long distances, so I kind of stuck with that. And then when I was in high school, I did 4 years of 3 sports. So I did cross country, basketball, and track every year that I was here, along with other activities as well. When I think back about my first jobs and things like that, my first job was on my friend's family farm. And so I tended corn, I tended soybeans, I worked with the hogs, did everything that they would have asked me to do. And then when I turned 16, I reached the pinnacle of high school employment. I worked at the kitchen at Pizza Hut. Okay, now, I have to say that that was actually a really fun place to work during those years. And given the number of calories that I needed to consume based on all the athletics I was doing, half-price pizzas were perfect. Okay, my nights out with friends mainly consisted of things like playing video games, watching movies, driving around in the country listening to loud music, and eventually trying to make some of that loud music on our own. So those were kind of fun things. Academically, I've always been a pretty good student. I was actually one of 11 valedictorians in my senior class. But if you had asked me what I wanted to do with my life at that time, I would have told you I had absolutely no idea. And so at one point I remember telling a teacher, I think, that I would never be happy if my career didn't have something to do with sports. But by the time I left PHS, my interests were so broad that I really had no idea what I was going to study in college or do with my life after that. So I wound up attending this place called Calvin College, now Calvin University, in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's a small Christian liberal arts college about 4 hours drive from here. There had been a small trickle of students from Princeton who had gone there over the years, but at the time I knew of one person who I knew for sure had gone there. And that's what planted the seed in my head that this might be a place worth visiting. I think we had 1 week off between cross-country and basketball season when I could miss school for a day and not miss any sport practices or meets or anything like that. So my dad and I drove up to Grand Rapids on a Thursday night. We did an all-day campus visit at Calvin on Friday. And I knew within an hour or two of being on that campus that that's the place that I actually wanted to be. It wasn't easy to figure out how I was going to finance my education there, mainly because I'd be leaving behind all this in-state grant money by going to school in another state. But through a combination of scholarships, loans, summers working out at the Ace Hardware warehouse and delivering pizzas at night, those were my summer jobs when I was in college, we were actually able to make it work for those 4 years. When I got to Calvin in the fall of 2001, I loved it right away. My roommate Nick and I got along really well. I met a bunch of cool people from all over the world, and I even started a band, a rock band, with a few of my new friends there. Academically, I was completely undecided on my major, and that's how I came in undecided. And so I took a bunch of different courses that first year, everything from German, psychology, and religion, to history, literature, and biology. And I kind of liked them all in some ways, but during the semester for first-year students, I heard a quote from a writer named Frederick Buechner. And this guy described one's vocation as being the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. And so I started to really give that some thought, because I was really trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I'd always liked math and science. I'd enjoyed being a tutor when I'd done that in high school. And I felt like there was always a need for good teachers. So I decided that I would pursue becoming a high school science teacher. That was my first track that I was on. Well, then during my second year as a student, there were several momentous things that happened, including a class that, looking back, completely changed the trajectory of my life forever. For a lot of years, Calvin offered this January term that you would take between the fall and spring semesters. So it'd be 3 weeks when you would take one class every day intensively and get full credit for it. And I took a course on evolutionary biology my sophomore year with these two guys. The guy on top is Dave Warners, he was a plant biologist, and then the guy on the bottom is Ralph Sturdy. He's a paleontologist, so he studies fossils. And this class changed my life in a number of different ways, but most importantly, it's actually where I met my wife. She was another student in the class. She was studying biology and education as well, and that's where the two of us first met. But this class is also where I heard about something I had never heard of before: walking whales. You heard that right. Whales with legs that could walk around all night. And I'd never been the kind of kid interested in dinosaurs or fossils growing up, But the idea that whales and dolphins actually came from ancient ancestors that had 4 legs and could walk around on land, that was something that just really blew me away. And as a part of that class, we actually got to go to the Museum of Paleontology at the University of Michigan. We got to do a behind-the-scenes tour, go into the fossil prep lab and things like that. And I literally got to hold some of these fossil whale bones, over 40 million years old. I got to hold them in my hands. And I was sold. Like, this is one of the most interesting things that I've ever encountered in school before. So in the weeks that followed this class, I started to realize that things that I was getting really fired up about in science were things that I might not get to do much as a high school teacher. So I had a lot of conversations with my mentors, Ralph and Dave, and they encouraged me to pursue another path forward instead, rather than planning on a high school teacher, being a college professor instead. And that would allow me to still teach, which was something I was excited about doing, but it also added in the possibility of doing scientific research as well. But it would also require me to do another 5 or 6 years of schooling after graduating from college. And that's never been something that I had ever considered at that point. And I was already having a hard enough time figuring out how to pay for my undergraduate education, so I didn't know how I could afford another 5 or 6 years of schooling. But my mentors helped me understand how graduate programs in the sciences work. How often when you pursue a master's or a PhD in a science discipline, students get jobs when they're students to actually teach college courses, or to be research assistants or museum assistants at the university. And so the university then actually pays all their tuition and gives them a little money to live on and gives them health benefits while they're there. So it's almost like doing school and a job at the same time, where part of your salary is actually having your tuition paid for. And so once I figured out that that was how things would work, I started to envision this as a viable path for me, and so I started to prepare for graduate school instead. So over the course of the next couple of years, I took a lot more geology courses, including a 3-week intensive course that I took in Hawaii, where we studied the volcanoes there. So that was amazing. I took a lot more biology as well, and even spent the summer after my junior year not working at Ace and Pizza Hut, but staying in Grand Rapids. And I did environmental assessments of natural areas around a small township outside of the Grand Rapids area. During my senior year, I worked with a fossil intensely for the first time. I did an independent study with my mentor Ralph to study a diseased backbone of a mastodon. So mastodon is an extinct elephant relative. They roamed in the Midwest. So this had been found outside of Grand Rapids a few years earlier, and I studied that for a project. And all of these experiences just helped me fall in love with the process of science and gave me affirmation that this was the career path that I really wanted to follow. So I applied to a few different programs to do a PhD in evolutionary biology, and I eventually got accepted to the University of Michigan in the Department of Evolutionary Biology. Now the really amazing thing about this is that this actually allowed me to work in that museum that I had visited back in my sophomore year. It would actually allow me to work under the gentleman here, Philip Gingrich, who was the world's expert on these fossil whales that I had learned about and gotten excited about potentially studying. And so this is where I spent the next 6 years of my life, getting to contribute to the scientific research about the origin and evolution of whales. So during those first couple of years at Michigan, I took a lot of classes. These were paleontology classes, studying fossils, classes in evolution, ecology, and also learning all the different methods that we can use to do research in all of those areas. I started to figure out the specifics of what I wanted to do for my dissertation. If you've ever heard of that before, it's the multi-year project you do for a PhD that's contributing something new to science. And while I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to investigate initially, I knew that I had to focus on the evolution of whales, because that was the most interesting thing I'd ever encountered in the discipline. So I'm guessing that some of you are probably wondering, what in the world makes the evolution of whales so interesting, right? Well, I'm really glad you're asking that, so I'm going to tell you, right? So let's talk about whales for a little bit. And these are the things that you can share with friends and family this weekend, where they ask like, what you learned in class on Friday, okay? So, whales are so fascinating because they're aquatic mammals. That's the easy answer. When most people think about mammals, they think of cute little critters with fur and 4 legs and running around on land, right? So that can include a lot of different things. I call them terrestrial creatures because they live on land. And that can include things like wolverines, go blue, chinchillas, and your dogs and cats at home. Those are all terrestrial mammals. But with a bit more brainstorming, I think a lot of you could probably think of some mammals that are actually adapted for life in water in some ways. This could be things like otters, seals, beavers, muskrats, Those are all what we'd call semi-aquatic mammals because they're spending time on land and in water. But then we have animals like cetaceans. Cetacean is the fancy name for anything that's a whale, dolphin, or porpoise. And when we think about cetaceans, those are animals that really can't come out on land, right? They're adapted for living in water full time. So when you look at a cetacean like a dolphin, you can see all these features that help demonstrate how well adapted they are to living in the water. They've got this short, stiff neck, they've got a lack of hind legs, and they've got this streamlined body shape to help them move through the water really efficiently. They've got this specialized tail, these arms that are shaped like paddles, and that dorsal fin on their back that help them to steer and move through the water really fast. They've got nostrils on the top of their heads. That's what a blowhole is, right? So all they have to do is stick the top of their head out of water, and they can take a big breath of fresh air and go right back down. Imagine if you could do that, like at the pool or lake during the summer. You'd impress all your friends and family, right? So we have all these features that we can see allow these animals to live so well in the water. And so we know that living on land like this pronghorn antelope is very, very different from living in water like the dolphin. So animals that are adapted well for life on land are not going to do so great in the water, and vice versa. Animals that are adapted for life in the water are not going to do so well on land. Now that presents a really interesting evolutionary problem, okay? Because the fossil record suggests that all of the oldest mammals that we are aware of lived on land. So any mammal that's adapted for life in water must have descended from an animal that lived on land. And that would just involve this drastic change in anatomy, physiology, behavior, and all kinds of other things. So how exactly did that happen? That's what I was interested in investigating, trying to uncover the details of how aquatic creatures like whales came from animals on land. So as a part of my training at Michigan, I learned how to study the skeletons of living mammals, of modern things, to help me understand the skeletons of fossils and what they might have been like. I learned how to work with the fossils in the lab, actually preparing them, getting them out of the rock, either for storage in a museum, but also for making molds and casts so we can make replicas, copies of them that could go on display at a museum, or maybe be shipped to a researcher at another museum. I also got the chance to do field work as well. And what this means is going out somewhere and looking for new fossils, and excavating those fossils, getting them ready for preparation, getting them back for study at a museum. Now, where in the world do you think would be a good place to look for old whales? Like really old whales. You're probably going to think like somewhere near the coast, but if you look at these pictures, those are the deserts of Egypt. And that is one of the most famous places in the world where we find some of these ancient whales. So this is a place that is called Wadi al-Hatam. If anyone in here knows Arabic, that means Valley of Whales in Arabic. Okay? And my time here, I spent 2 months doing field work. It was the experience of a lifetime. The area itself is about 80 miles or so southwest of the pyramids in northern Egypt. So it's in the eastern part of the Sahara Desert. And about 40 million years ago, it wasn't a desert. It was actually covered by a warm, shallow seaway that's connecting the modern-day Mediterranean Sea to the Indian Ocean. And there had been some German paleontologists who had discovered whale fossils here in the late 1800s, but there hadn't been much field work done there since then, so it was so hard to get to this area. And it was my doctoral advisor, Philip Gingrich, who started going here in the early 1980s to look for some of these whale fossils that are there. And it's become a famous place for both the quantity of whale fossils found here, but also how high quality they are as well. So let me tell you a little bit about what it was like to be there. So during my field season there, we had a writer and 2 photographers from National Geographic magazine that were there with us for about 2 or 3 weeks of our field season. And there was one night when we went out to look for a new fossil whale that had been recently discovered by a hiker who was just hiking through this area. And so we went out this evening, and in this image here, those 3 little blue arrows are the National Geographic guys. So you see how little they are. They're at the top of this sandy slope, and I took that picture. And I started to climb up this sandy slope to meet them up there. And along the way, I was looking for little bits of bone. So when you're on a fossil expedition, you're training your eyes to see rocks, dirt, soil. Ooh, that's bone. So you're always looking for little bits of bone. And as I was walking up this slope, I kept finding little pieces of bone to collect. Like I'd walk up the slope and find like a little phalanx, a little finger bone here. And I'd walk a few more steps and I'd find a fragment of a rib over here. And I'd walk a few more steps and I'd find a piece of a vertebra, a backbone over here. And then when you get to the top of the slope, you see this. That's an entire whale skeleton just eroding out of a cliff. This is just a wall of sandstone with these bones just basically falling out of this cliff. Now, not every fossil there is like this. Some of them have been weathering in the wind and sand for a long time, and not all of them are this complete either. But the fossils of whales and other sea creatures are pretty much everywhere here. About a year after our expedition, National Geographic put out an article about the expedition and the work that my advisor had done over the course of his career. It was pretty cool to see my name in print, I must admit. I even had a friend who was like flipping through National Geographic at the dentist and just like see my name there, like totally not expecting it. So that was kind of a fun message to get. And I even got my picture in there, though we can debate if they got my best side or not. Some of you might say, yeah, it's probably the best side. But regardless, I mean, it was cool to see this place finally promoted for the general public to see. Because since the early 1980s, University of Michigan-led teams have mapped over 1,500 different whales there. 1,500 different whales. So, I mean, that's absolutely wild to have that concentration of fossils. Here are what two of the best-known fossil whales from Egypt look like when they're mounted and on display. So that one in the front, it's called Dorodon. It's about 16 feet long, so it's going to be a little bit bigger than a dolphin, so maybe like narwhal size or something like that. And the one in the back, that's Basilosaurus, and that's the monster here. It can get over 60 feet long. And both of these species are known from hundreds of different specimens, and if you've been to any natural history museums, in places like the Field Museum or Smithsonian, you've probably seen some of these things on display. Now, if you look really closely where those arrows are, you'll notice that those fossils have very small but fully formed hind legs. Now, you may not realize that even today, almost every modern whale or dolphin has bones back where its legs should be. But before those bones were found in Basilosaurus, no one had ever seen a whale with a pelvis and a femur and a kneecap and little ankles and toes before. So that was a brand new discovery when it was first seen. Now, if you think that's cool, which I'm guessing at least a few nerdy folks in here do, and I consider myself among them, okay, it gets better than that. And that's because my advisor had also done work not just in Egypt, but in India and Pakistan, where the rocks there are actually older. So the fossils you find there are older as well. And those whales don't look much like whales at all. So the one on top is Pakicetus. It's one of the oldest known fossil cetaceans we have. It's about 50 million years old. And then the one below that's Myocetus. That's 47 million years old. And I was actually in the lab the day we opened up the plaster jackets to start studying and preparing that specimen. They're quite a bit smaller, right? So maybe just 3 to 6 feet long from head to tail. But what's really wild is that they've got 4 legs, and they can clearly walk on land. Yet at the same time, when we look at some other details of their skeleton, particularly when we look at the ear region of their skull, we can see these adaptations that suggest they were spending a lot of time in water as well. So these are amphibious or semi-aquatic whales. Now these two are just a sampling of some of the species that we actually know of today. And to date, we've got over 65 different species of these very early fossil whales that show us how whales move from land to sea. And when we put them in order of how old they are, the pattern is really, really striking, right? So we can see the oldest whales, like Pakicetus, look very similar to animals that lived on land, with only a few adaptations for life in the water. But as we go forward through time and we look at younger and younger and younger fossils, we see this clear trend of increasing adaptation for life in the water. And we can look at pretty much any part of the skeleton and see that. We can measure how the neck actually shortens to give them a streamlined body shape. We can look at changes in the ear and jaw that mean they were able to hear sounds underwater better than they could hear sounds in air. We can even trace the movement of the nostrils, right? The blowhole is on the top of the head. These oldest whales have nostrils at the end of the snout, and we can see it moving farther and farther back along the skull over time as well. The particular questions that I've been most interested in investigating actually involve the evolution of swimming. Okay, so with only a few exceptions, nearly all mammals can swim if you put them in water, though clearly some, like this cat, don't get very excited about it if you put them in the water. But those animals, when you put them in the water, they swim with a doggy paddle. They're just moving all 4 limbs, their arms and legs, to propel themselves through the water, and that is not a very efficient way to swim. When we look at animals like dolphins, they've actually lost those back legs, and they've developed this specialized tail, this fluke that they move up and down through the water to propel them forward with a much more efficient stroke. When we look at the oldest fossil whales, we find 4-legged animals that probably swam using a doggy paddle. If we move forward about 12 million years, we've already got fossils that are fully aquatic and likely have specialized tail fleet for swimming. So how exactly do we shift from leg-powered swimming to tail-powered swimming? Well, I study the fossils in between these two extremes and reconstruct the anatomy and what their capabilities are to try to understand that question in detail. But there are other things that I've explored within whale evolution as well. I've had the privilege of actually getting to name a new species. That was a pretty fun thing. This is Rheanistes-ophir. That's its scientific name. And before you ask, no, I did not try to name it after me. This is actually a member of the ancient whale family Remingtonicidae. It's a mouthful. But that's the group that was the primary focus of my dissertation back when I was in school. And at the time that I was studying them, this whole family of whales was only known from India and Pakistan. Shortly after I finished my time at Michigan, they actually discovered this skeleton in Egypt. And I was invited by some of those scientists to actually lead the study to document and describe it. So it's named for its location. Wadi El Rayyan is the valley it was found in Egypt. And Ophir is Latin for Africa. And so that means that this is the first whale of its kind that was ever located in Africa. So its name literally means inhabitant of Rayyan from Africa. So kind of fun to get to come up with a creative name like that. Now, I would love to tell you all about all the different projects I've worked on, but I'm assuming you guys don't want to stay late on a Friday afternoon, right? So I'll kind of skip a lot of those. But I'll just tell you that this type of research is all ongoing. And one of the beautiful things about science is that as you start to get answers to questions, you almost always come up with new questions that you had never thought to investigate before. So I don't find myself doing field work quite as much these days, but I continue to spend time working in museums around the world with specimens that others have collected. Just this past summer, I was at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., and we were studying modern whale vertebrae. So that's me up there with a single backbone, a single bone from a blue whale, which is arguably the largest creature that has ever existed on our planet. And the great part of all of this is that I actually get to do this with undergraduate students as well. So during most summers, I have a student working for me full-time as a research assistant that summer. And together we go to museums and we study skeletal material of both modern things and fossil things to help better understand how the whales we know today came to be. But that's actually just part of my work, right, that research side, because during the academic year, I'm a professor, I'm a teacher. And I teach biology courses to students at Calvin University, where I myself was a student over 20 years ago. And by my count, I've now taught almost 3,000 different students at the college level. I primarily teach courses in human anatomy and physiology to students who are studying to be nurses, physicians, physical therapists, and things like that. And I'm just trying to help them learn about the structure of the human body and how it works. But I also get to teach comparative anatomy as well. That's my real bread and butter. Doing physiology and zoology courses too to future veterinarians and wildlife biologists, trying to help them understand the ways that animals are adapted for different ways of life. In all those courses, I'm trying to help give my students a strong foundation for understanding how bodies are built, how they work, and then also how they change through time. My hope is that students can apply the knowledge that they're learning in my courses to whatever specific field they pursue after graduating from Calvin. I've also had the chance to get to teach experiential off-campus courses as well. These are some of the most fun things I've done in my career. I've gotten to teach multi-week trips in the Andes Mountains in Ecuador. I've taught in the Galapagos Islands, which inspired Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection. And I've also worked recently with a colleague to develop a course in New Zealand that incorporates both biology, but also the socio-cultural history of interactions between European colonists and the native Maori population there. We actually led that course for the very first time in January of 2020, right at the start of the pandemic, and we are now actually planning to go back there again for the first time since then in May of this coming year. And so, looking at all these things and all the opportunities I've had, all the places I've been able to go through my work, traveling to distant places and immersing myself in the unique cultures of the people who live there, I'm extremely grateful for all of those things, because those experiences have changed my perspective on so many different aspects of our world. So I would encourage any of you who ever have the opportunity to experience a new place, either in the US or abroad, diving into a new culture, I would just encourage you to take a leap and do it. Okay, learn a new language, try new foods, dive into the unique histories of the people who live in those places, and listen to their stories too, because there's so much that we can learn. when we engage with people whose lived experiences are very different from the ones that we have had. Finally, I've also had the opportunity to venture outside my scientific work, to contribute to discussions at the interface of science and religion as well. And when I first started studying evolutionary biology as a college student, it wasn't without a fair amount of caution, because I had this idea that the science of evolution was totally incompatible with my faith as a Christian. And that was a really vital part of who I was. And as I started to talk with these mentors that I had at Calvin and read some more, I started to see that there were actually a lot of different ways that science and religion could actually go hand in hand. And that the two didn't have to be in opposition to one another, but they could actually mutually enrich one another in ways that I had never really considered before. And so, while pursuing evolution and paleontology as a person of faith hasn't always been easy for me, especially because it raises some really hard questions to think through, I think I've become a person that is more than happy to not shy away from the hard questions. And in fact, I really like to lean into those hard questions instead. So that's actually something I'm very passionate about, both for myself and for my students, as I help them try to engage with science from the perspective of faith. I've gotten to spend a couple of summers as a visiting scholar of science and religion in Oxford, at the University of Oxford in England, where I spent some time exploring some different theological questions that stem from my scientific work. And I've partnered with this organization, the BioLogos Foundation. It's a nonprofit organization that was founded by geneticist Francis Collins, who you might have heard of. And their goal is to promote the compatibility of science and religion. And so partnering with them has allowed me the chance to go to churches and schools all around the country and give presentations about issues that are of interest to people. And through this, I've been able to engage with a host of people who have views very different from my own on these issues. And I think that has actually helped to teach me how important it is to be able to converse well with one another, even when we disagree about things that are really important to us. So hopefully that kind of whirlwind tour through my life and work has at least given you a sense for my journey up to this point. And even if you don't find yourself as excited about fossils or whales or any of this stuff as I am, I hope that each of you has gotten a sense that in the years to come, your life is going to be full of possibilities. So before I get to dismiss you for the day, right, I'd like to leave you with just a few bits of advice or pieces of encouragement to you as you encounter all of those possibilities that are going to come for you in the years to come. And the first is to pursue your interests and passions. And I can say firsthand that at the outset, you might not know exactly where that's going to go. But I think when you're engaging with things that you love and enjoy learning about, that's ultimately going to give you a happier future. There's no one way to be successful. And we need all kinds of people in this world doing all kinds of different things. So why not pursue a life that gives you deep gladness and meets some need in the community you're in? So that's the first bit. Second, don't be afraid of challenges. Difficult things are often the most worth doing, and those are the places where you typically will grow the most in your life as well. So if you happen to encounter any of those challenges in any aspect of your life that seem insurmountable, I'd encourage you not to be afraid to ask for help. Whether it's a family member, a teacher, a coworker, a friend, I really believe there are always going to be people out there who care about you and are willing to be there for you when you need it. And I've experienced that firsthand as well. And the hardest part was usually just asking for that. So third, take advantage of any opportunities you have to learn from other people, especially when they're different from you. None of us knows everything. And any single life is just a tiny sliver of the whole human experience. And I found that my view of the world and of myself has changed immensely by being open to learning from people with very different perspectives than mine, whether that's a person from the other side of the world or someone who's simply across the room and has had a very different set of experiences. And finally, find ways to work together for the common good. I don't think we need to imagine very much to see this, that our society and our world are often more divided than ever. But our world is full of complex problems that we need to work together to solve. And this can't happen if we're unwilling to work with folks we disagree with. So I'd encourage you all to look for ways that you can come together with other people to work for the betterment of our schools, our communities, and our planet. So with that, I thank you all for your attention and wish you all nothing but the best.